Welcome back to the Waterlogged Woodsman. As you can tell, we've got a sick day of diving ahead with some complete glass-off conditions, and after a quick hike down the trail and a hop in with just a little bit of swell on the beach, we are straight into 25 to 30 feet of visibility, with it stretching out to about 40 feet of viz farther out. Now the first thing we do when we get in is we're going to be looking for some scallops. The guy I'm diving with, Rafa, is a real scallop connoisseur, you could say, and we're going to be checking every crack and crevice we can, looking for these little tasty treats out here. Now, in California, especially here in Big Sur, we've got rock scallops, and they're tucked into every tight hole and cave and crevice, so you really got to dig around to try to find them. After a quick breathe up on the surface and turning my flashlight on, I'm going to go down here and look for the scallop that Rafa is trying to point out to me. He said he's left his ab iron down there to try to point out the hole it's in, and you'll see quickly that it is tucked in deep. Now he's been working on it for a couple minutes here, and I've seen him fully bend this thick ab iron trying to get these things out. There's just no leverage here, and I'm working hard, but unfortunately, I've got to leave it and go back up to the surface. And while I might not have been successful, Rafa clearly knew what he was looking for and had some great success finding some monster scallops. After picking up a couple of those scallops there, we're going to swim around looking for fish now, and unfortunately, as you can tell here, Big Sur has the same urchin problem as anywhere else. You just can't get away from these little purple urchins in this coastline right now, and I think something really needs to be done about it. After heading out a bit deeper, we stumble across our first school of fish, and of course, like normal, it is a school of blues. But luckily, there's some good ones in it. So check out this dive as I head down to check out the school. Usually you'll see me leaving my gun on the bottom like this if I've seen some fish and decided I found the best spot to hunt them from. Right here I've left it behind this boulder because I know I can tuck behind it where the fish can't see me and get ready to shoot one as they come in closer. Whenever you're diving and you don't have a fish in range, I would recommend, especially at the beginning of your dive, checking your surroundings to make sure there aren't fish behind you. Rockfish like to come in behind you to check you out when you're not suspecting them. Luckily, I've got a super fat one swimming in at me here, and I stretch out and hit him with a nice headshot. Right behind the gills, perfect shot, great fish. This fish was a fat blue rockfish. When we gutted them later, we figured out they were full of roe. And this one went in probably around that 17 or 18 inch mark, just a solid fish, great for our local area. After dealing with that fish, I went down again to see if there were any other large blue rockfish in that school. Now, when I went down here, I had a pretty weird little nature experience with a quick little interaction with one of the dumbest fish I've ever seen in the ocean. You'll notice he has a little white spot in his head, which I have a sinking suspicion is where Rafa bounced the shaft off of him, and he's now become one of the most brain-dead fish in the ocean. Oftentimes when you get these fields of kelp like this, one of the best tactics is to just hit the bottom and kind of snake your way through the kelp. Just pulling on it with your hands, grabbing the bottom, and being super sneaky, using it as cover. Now, I noticed in this one that the fish have moved a little bit off the spot where I shot that last blue and are hiding over here in the current by that big boulder. Unfortunately, you can see all the biggest fish are over there just out of reach as I reach out to take a look at a couple fish but decide they're not quite big enough to take home. By now I've warmed up my lungs and I've relocated the fish and I'm heading back down again for another dive. I hit the bottom again, sitting in the kelp, looking around for these big blue rockfish that are in the area, looking over some pretty big perch as well, but they're not really on the menu. And as I quickly crawl along the bottom, I notice this big blue rockfish coming a little bit closer to me. Now, when I see these fish like this, I like to be really slow in all my movements, and a lot of times they get attracted by them. When he comes just a little bit too close, hit him with that headshot, and then I skull drag him to the surface. Now we've had our pick of that school of blues and we've pulled out all the big ones. All that's left are those 12 to 15 inch kind of standard blues. And on a day like this, we don't really want to keep shooting those, and we want to take only the biggest and best fish. So we've moved over to this new spot. It's got a bit more kelp, a bit more life. You can see the bait in the water as I'm going down. And as I hit the bottom, I'm looking around for more of those blues. Those big blues are what I'm looking for. But then out of the corner of my eye, catch a glimpse of another one of our rockfish, another one of our mid-water column rockfish. And these guys are honestly my favorite to eat. These olive rockfish are just exquisitely tasty and they're very hard to shoot. I find it kind of interesting that these mid-water column type fish tend to run up towards the surface when they're shot, whereas like your kelp and rockfish that are more on the bottom tend to dig into the kelp or the rocks. So kind of an interesting trait of the fish depending on how they like to spend their time. And this fish is a pretty good one. You know, he's not a super monster, but he's in that 17 to 18 inch mark, and he's just a class above the vast majority of the fish we get in the area. Now, the stringer's starting to look pretty good, and it's getting pretty full. So we're going to start looking a lot more closely at all the fish we're targeting. There's a ton of life around, so I know I can be extremely picky. By picky means, I'm going to either shoot new fish, or I'm going to shoot big fish. Either one, my preference is always the big fish though. The next thing that happened was I saw Rafa dragging a black rockfish to the surface. Now, we don't see very many black rockfish up in Monterey, and I've honestly never had a chance to shoot one of any sort of size. I've seen probably a couple, like 10 inchers, but obviously those aren't for the dinner plate. So I head down, hoping that there'll be one, and I spot one on the way down, but he disappears into this kelp forest. Now, one of the tricks I've found with fish, especially rockfish that are curious, is if you don't see them, just hang out. They tend to get curious, and just your vibrations in the water will attract them to you. So just keep your eyes out. Here I'm looking back and forth, looking through all the fish, making sure that none of these blues or perch are the black rockfish I'm looking for. And then floating up out of the bottom of the kelp, I see the black rockfish I'm looking for, and he's coming right at me. So I drill him in the head, and I'm taking home my first black rockfish in California. At this point, we're starting to see more and more fish make their way onto this patch of reef. I don't know if it was a tide change or what, but the schools were getting bigger and it was getting way fishier. And I've got 4 fish on my stringer now, so I'm getting extremely picky. There's a couple reasons for that. One being I've got enough food now for at least a week or 2 of eating good quality rockfish. And the second one is I'm starting to feel the drag when I'm diving. And I don't want that to be weighing me down when there's a chance I'll find an even bigger fish later on. As I'm breathing up on the surface, Rafa calls me over saying there's an absolute giant black rockfish underneath him. So I head over and I can see the thing from the surface. It has got shoulders. This is a large black rockfish, and a large rockfish period. So I take a bit of a dive bomb, approach to him, I'm coming in from the side, and I think I've got him lined up. And boom, he rips off. You can tell I kind of flinch here and I send the shaft high and it just goes pretty much right under the skin, and that was a pretty devastating fail. I was pretty sad after that one. But luckily, that wasn't the only fish in this school. There were 4 or 5 black rockfish of that size. Rafa hadn't seen them, and now I'm going down to chase another one. When I pick my head up, I look and there are 2 large blacks to my side, and I pick the bigger of the 2, just very obviously larger. He's probably a 19-inch black rockfish. Follow him along and boom, nice shot behind the gills and a great fish coming home for dinner. After this big black, I've got more than enough rockfish, and I'm not going to shoot anything that's not a PB or a new species. So, as I'm sitting on the surface breathing up, I noticed this snake-like shape go through one of these sand patches underneath me. There's only a couple fish that can be. The first one is usually a greenling, and we've seen quite a few of those today. But this thing looked huge. And when there is something this size snaking along the bottom, it is more than likely a lingcod. So I spend a couple of dives looking around, trying to figure out where the heck this fish has been before I finally give up and do the oldest trick I know and one of the best working ones, which is leave my gun on the bottom. For some reason, leaving your gun on the bottom when there's a lingcod around is one of the most attractive things to them. I think it's the metal banging with the swell, or maybe it's just something being in their ecosystem that they're not used to and they're a bit defensive. But leaving your gun on the bottom when you don't know where a lingcod has been could be one of the greatest things to bring them in. Now I get down and pretty quickly spot him sitting right next to my gun. And when I make a move, unfortunately he kicks back into this cave, which I was worried about him going super deep in. But he turns around to stare me down, and I point at him, line up a hopeful stone shot, and he just blows out of the cave. I just missed that stone shot by an inch, and he's coming flying out directly at me, shaft swinging around like a fencer, and I just try to grab him and keep him away from me, but luckily he sinks down, and I've got a pretty solid shot here where I've injured him pretty good. I thought this fish had looked pretty good on the bottom, but as you know, fish grow with depth, and I was getting more and more excited as I was dragging him up and he wasn't shrinking. I knew pretty quickly that this was probably my PB, so I held him up in the air to yell at Rafa. This fish ended up being 29.5 inches and was my biggest fish to date, which had previously been a 27-inch lingcod. And I was extremely happy about getting this guy. It has been an amazing dive. I've got big rockfish, I've got a lingcod now, we've got some great scallops. Pretty much one of the most successful dives I've had here in California. If you've made it this far, thanks again for hanging out with me. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next one.